have with us retired Rear Admiral Adrian A.J. Jackson, who I think some of you might know as classmate, some of you might know as mayor from Bartow, others of you might know as Sun and Fun. Any Sun and Fun people in the room? There we go, quite a few. And you might not have known that AJ was born and raised in Bartow. He joined the United States Navy by attending Aviation Officer Candidate School in 1970. And he was designated a naval aviator in February of 1972. From there forward, he embarked on 36 years of service to our country. While on active duty and as a reservist, Rear Admiral Jackson traveled overseas extensively and enjoyed a broad field of responsibility. His exemplary career of service was recognized in 1998 for his selection to Rear Admiral. Today, we are honored for AJ to join us and share with us his memories of joining the service and particularly serving our nation following the tragic events of 9/11. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Murtis. Murtis is going to be our moderator for the program today. Without further ado, AJ, if you'll come on up.
Thank you, Jamie. Kind introduction and a flashback when she was talking about the cell phones. When I was an admiral and attending conferences with the chief of naval operations, and there'd be 220 admirals in the room, and the first rule was turn your cell phone off. If it goes off, it's a $1,000 fine, and bring your check to the table. So fortunately, we're a little bit more mellow these days. But there's a lot of pressure here. I've spoken to a lot of groups over the years, lots of Naval, Marine Corps ceremonies, and but now I'm feeling the pressure. I've never had to speak to classmates, to my Little League football coach, to my chairman of the board of Sun and Fun, to friends in the community, so this is a little bit different. And I can, in all honesty, say it's great to be back in Bartow, because you may or may not know, but almost 2 months ago, Jan and I sold our home and left Bartow. So I can truly say it's nice to be back. And no matter where I may live, Bartow will always be home. So good to be here.
And again, I just want to really say how fortunate we are to have this opportunity to have Jan. Thank you, Jan, for traveling around and coming and being with us too, and AJ with us today. Bartholomew, Bartow Camp, our curator of collections, and I went over to AJ and Jan's home and looked through their artifacts, and we thought, what a great idea. Hometown hero, hometown Bartow guy, did great things. I always thought they were cool people. I really did not know how important he really is until I went to his house and we saw these things and we said, let's build an exhibit. So we thought we had weeks, at least possibly months to do this. And after our second visit, I learned the house had sold. They were moving away and we had to get in a really warp speed. So we're very, very fortunate, we mean Polk County, we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to showcase AJ's career and say thank you to both AJ and Jan. So, okay, let's get started with the beginning in the beginning. So let's go back, our first slide here, 1966. Tell us about that. Did you have any idea when you were at Bartow High School what your career life was going to be like? What were you thinking of in 1966?
Well, 1966, you can ask this row back here, I was just thinking about graduating from high school, you know. But you know, growing up, my father, like the fathers of most of my friends, were World War II veterans. A few moms were veterans, Barbara. And so the idea of service was nothing new to me. I hadn't really mapped out my career. Obviously in 1966, Vietnam War is going on, and I knew there's a good likelihood that in some way, somehow, I might end up serving in the military. But it really wasn't until I went off to college, and then, you know, now we're talking 1968, 69, things are still pretty hot. Then there's a thing called the draft lottery that's on the horizon. The only time I've ever won the lottery. But so one day I was walking on the campus at the bookstore. I turned the corner, it was about 4, naval aviators dressed in their white uniforms and gold wings, and they reeled me in. And so I joined the Navy in 1969. That's kind of the start of my military career.
So tell us a little bit of that early time, memorable events at that early part of the year.
Yeah, sure. Well, when you go into the naval flight training, much to my shock, it's administered by the Marine Corps. And Walter can tell you about Marine DIs, and I learned about Marine DIs in a hurry because I thought they have made a mistake. I didn't join the Marine Corps, I joined the Navy. But yeah, I didn't see anybody but Marines for about the first 11 weeks of officer candidate school. And then we started basic flight training at Sofley Field in a small Beechcraft T-34. There was a point in time where in the Navy flies 3 different areas: multi-engine patrol planes, helicopters, and tactical jets off aircraft carriers. By now it's 1971, Vietnam is winding down, and I have this, I don't know, curiosity, ambition, and drive to go fly helicopters. The Navy had 1 helicopter gunship squadron in Vietnam, HAL 3. They flew cover for all the brown water patrol boat Navy. So my flight instructor is asking me which one of these communities do I want to go into, jets, multi-engine helicopters. And I just said, well, I want to fly helicopters. I want to go to HAL 3. Well, his face blew up. He's a tactical jet guy, Vietnam vet, flew A6s. He starts beating me on the chest saying, helicopters? You don't want to fly helicopters. You joined the Navy for one reason and one reason only. That's to fly jets off aircraft carriers. And I just said, yes, sir, I want to fly jets off aircraft carriers. So that started my jet training. I went to the fleet, flew the single-seat A7 Corsair. Far right-hand side is a Corsair coming aboard ship. Flying off the ship is it's a thrill and it's terrifying, often in the same flight. You know, there's nothing else like it. The ballet on the flight deck, 19, 20-year-olds, everybody color-coded jerseys by what your function is. But, you know, flying off aircraft carriers was just a hoot, except at night. And night, we don't even want to talk about it. I became a good friend of Harrison Schmidt, and then, well, several astronauts. And they would talk about people asking them about landing on the moon. Weren't you terrified landing on the moon? And Gene Cernan in particular, the last man to walk on the moon, we loved him. He was a Navy guy. He said, landing on the moon? Ah, piece of cake. Now you try landing on an aircraft carrier at night on a pitching deck, now that's terrifying. So these are other shots taken around, just my career. What I need to explain from 1978 to 2001, I did leave active duty and entered the reserve force. But because I was still flying tactical jets in the reserves, we had the same qualifications. Still had to drop weapons. You still had to go to the boat. And so, unlike some reserve units that are traditional 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, our minimum was 10 days a month. So from right off the bat, I'm doing 10 to 12 days a month in the Navy, and the rest of the time an airline pilot. That graduated as I got more senior to the point where eventually, out of every year, I was probably on active duty 5 to 6 months out of every year. And so it's a little bit different career path than weekend warriors, but that's what took me to being selected for flag. Later on, I flew DC-9s. We were down in Australia, and I had to get the obligatory kangaroo decal put on the airplane. I was telling Murtis earlier, this is my first squadron command, and that's the only good use of a sword is to cut the cake at changes of command. On the far right, in 2000, I was again back on active duty, and I was the temporary interim commander of all naval forces in Korea. That was my office in Seoul, and Jan was with me that time in Korea and has never forgiven me for taking her to the DMZ on January 1st, 2001 and scraping ice off the inside window of the bus we were in. And then that takes me up to Coalition, actually at my retirement ceremony, which some of you were. It's a young Nepalese major on my right, and the one I worry about the most is on the left. He's Ukrainian, and I've often wondered where he is now in Ukraine. So that's pretty much the reserve years of 78 to 2001.
Okay, so in 2001, you're now assigned as Deputy Director for Plans and Policies at CENTCOM. You're now a Rear Admiral. Tell us about your feelings about that. What happened? Plans and policies are an event that happened overnight.
Well, this job in Korea, the payback for having commuted to Korea for 2 years, the Chief of Navy Reserve said, AJ, you live down near Tampa. We have an empty billet at Central Command Headquarters. It's the Deputy J5, the shop responsible for strategy, plans, and policy. He says, as a payback for having gone to Korea for 2 years, we want you to go to CENTCOM, report on or about September 1st, 2001. So on September 4th, I showed up at CENTCOM. I was there for about 3 days doing the typical security badges, orientation, talking to my immediate boss, which would be another Navy officer, the only other Navy admiral on the staff. And I told him I still had a little leftover stuff to do with my job in Korea. If it's okay, I would come back maybe in October and really dig into that. He said, that's fine. We don't really have anything going on right now, so go back, fly your airline trip, and we'll see you in October. And that, we know what happens then.
Tell us what you remember about, where were you, what were your thoughts about 9/11? Were you here, there, beyond?
Well, like all of you, you can remember exactly where you were on 9/11. I can tell you I was in the cockpit of an American Airlines 727 in San Juan, Puerto Rico. We were ready to close the door and fly to Philadelphia. We're just waiting for the passenger service agent to make the last PA and close the door when my flight engineer let out a few choice words to, oh my gosh, and I get a long printed message from our company saying, Captain, do not repeat, do not leave the gate, call dispatch, our operations center. So I get off the airplane and I find out what has happened. The first airplane is hit, and I quietly got my crew off the airplane, called a hotel, gave them my personal credit card and said, I need rooms for 7 American Airlines crew members. We're not on a layover, but I knew we weren't going anywhere. And so by the time we did all that, the second airplane had hit. And then Flight 77 hit the Pentagon with a good friend of mine, Captain Chick Burlingame, the captain of the aircraft, and another mentor, a retired Navy Reserve Rear Admiral and American Airlines pilot, Bud Flagg, Rear Admiral Bud Flagg and his wife Dee were passengers on that airplane. So 9/11 has always been special for me. And so by that afternoon of September 11th, I was in San Juan, like I said, my phone's ringing. Central Command is calling saying, where are you? When can you get here? And get here as soon as you can and consider yourself mobilized, recalled to active duty. And so actually, it was that Friday the 14th when I was able to actually talk American Airlines into letting me fly an airplane from San Juan to Tampa. Got in that night, I called Jan and said, meet me at the airport with a uniform. I'm going to MacDill. And when I got to MacDill that Friday night, they'd already been working plans and a response for several days, but pretty chaotic. Most of the staff were never leaving the office. The hallways or passageways for us shipboard guys. Cots in the passageways, working literally 20, 21 hours a day, go into the gym, take a shower, throw down as much coffee as you can to keep you going, and it was just high tempo, high stress. I can't even begin to describe the work environment in that first 2 weeks following 9/11.
And at what point did you realize the role that you were going to be playing in this event?
Right. CENTCOM is one of 7 geographic, what we call unified combatant commanders. In other words, there are 7 commands that have a geographic part of the world to engage. For CENTCOM, it's always has been, always will be, the Middle East, plus in 2001, the Horn of Africa. We had 25 countries that we engaged with military cooperation, security engagement, but we knew that of those 25 countries, now we're only talking about a couple of them that were going to take pretty much 100% of our attention. But we could not, forget the other countries. We still had to reach out to them. And then actually, by way of doing that, we started building the coalition. By the first week, the phones were ringing off the hook with countries wanting to do something. At first, they were going through diplomatic channels, going to the State Department. The State Department was calling us saying, Croatia wants to do this, Estonia wants to do this. And so we became the collecting point for the coalition countries. The parking lot outside the headquarters building, where on September 4th I had a reserved parking spot with my name on it. September 14th, we're already building what we call the Tommy Franks trailer park. We bought in modular buildings to house all the coalition countries. Early on, we knew it was Al-Qaeda. We go back to the 1995 World Trade Center bombings. We go back to Tanzania and Kenya embassy bombings. We go back to the Cole, the USS Cole, which was, hit by an IED suicide bomber in Yemen in 2000, killed 17 sailors. So we knew who we were looking for. We knew it was going to be Al-Qaeda, and where do they hang out but Afghanistan. So everything was geared towards, well, what are we going to do now?
And that was very clearly the mission of the coalition was to...
Well, initially, and as President Bush called it, the coalition of the willing. Who's willing to step up and let's go find the people responsible for the terrorist attacks? And it really wasn't hard to do. We'll talk about Japan in a minute. Japan had 24 citizens killed on 9/11. So countries that lost their own citizens, they were willing to come to the fight. The challenge for us at CENTCOM in our J5 directorate policy is how to incorporate all these different countries. Initially, about 5 countries went to combat with us when the combat started October 7th. And then that grew 27 countries, and then by the time NATO got involved and the International Security Force was created, I was last working with 66 countries as part of the coalition. So
it's incredible to think about that. In our next slide, we're going to take a look at some images around 2005. And you're in Afghanistan at this point working with members of the coalition forces. And if you can walk us through some of these images. This
is one of my favorite photos. To me, it says, what's a Navy guy doing in Army battle rattle gear in a Humvee in the middle of Iraq? I'm supposed to be on a ship somewhere, but anyway, it wasn't to happen. So this is in Bamiyan province, Afghanistan. We're at about 12,000 foot elevation there. You're seeing the remains of a Soviet gun installation. You're seeing the remains of what we called the Bamiyan Buddhas. There were 2 Buddhas, a large one to the left, Buddha West we called it, and then Buddha East. These dated back 2,000 years, and they were UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and the Taliban drove their tanks up and blasted these statues to pieces. That's one of the cavities left. The larger Buddha was 185 feet high. I actually crawled in these caves in the cavity where the Buddha was. The smaller one was 125 feet high. Tragic. I mean, tragic to lose such world history for no reason at all. The Taliban said they were idols. The people were worshiping idols, so they destroyed them. That's going on a patrol outside of Kabul. I'm actually in a Humvee with Polish soldiers. And that's typical street scene, leaving the gates, going out. I think we're probably on our way to Babylon. The Polish had their sector included the biblical city of Babylon. And I tell you what, just to walk through Babylon, you think, wait a minute, this is biblical. I mean, it's hard to believe the city exists, but it does. So we were on our way to Babylon in that picture. I can't describe how beautiful a country can be and how ugly a country can be, quite honestly. But this is up in the Hindu Kush mountain range. Afghanistan, half the country is over a mile high. It's mountainous beyond belief. These mountains, the peak was about 25,000 feet. Consider that Mount Everest is 29,000 feet. That's the terrain that a lot of our troops had to deal with. In fact, we're in a Chinook helicopter. Helicopters couldn't fly at the altitudes we needed to. Some of our combat ops were at 14,000 feet and higher, and you just can't get up there. But that's the mountain ranges and the terrain that we face. Start talking about the coalition, the Japanese. Very interesting subject. We could talk about that for a while. Following World War II and the adoption of the Japanese Constitution in 1947, they were forbidden to go to war. They were a self-defense force only. They got rid of, like, the Imperial Japanese Navy. It became the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, the Air Force, Japanese Air Defense Force. Everything for the Japanese was self-defense, but yet they, as I said, 24 of their citizens killed in the World Trade Center. They wanted to do something. I'm meeting with them in Camp Virginia, Kuwait, just across the border from their area of Iraq. They're about to deploy into Iraq. The biggest mission they did early on was clearing landmines. It may sound like an exaggeration, but believe me, following the Soviet Union withdrawal, it's estimated in 2001 there were over 10 million landmines in Afghanistan. So mine clearing was huge. On every given month, there's about 300 Afghan civilians just killed just walking down a road. I went by untold numbers of marked out, don't cross here landmines. I mean, it's everywhere. And the Japanese were very forthright in clearing the landmines. They built hospitals, they built roads. They did everything humanitarian, humanly possible. They just couldn't go to combat. In fact, we had Dutch troops stationed with the Japanese to provide for combat if they were fired upon. I have to say also that second to the United States, Japan spent more money in humanitarian missions and reconstruction in Afghanistan than any other country in the world. Japan was number 2. My good old friends from Korea. I had, as I said, spent a lot of time in Korea. The Koreans were, again, doing humanitarian missions. They're building roads again, building schools, water wells, the whole gamut of humanitarian ops. Up in the far right-hand side, I'm signing a picture for them. This is a C-130 group. They had their C-130s in country to provide logistics. And I will say that the North Koreans, I know who they want to fight. South Koreans built a gigantic hospital in northern Iraq in Erbil in the Kurdish country. And so when I went up to Erbil to visit there, the commanding general of the Korean detachment started walking towards me, and I'm walking to him. We both stop. We both say, "I know you." And yeah, the year before, he and I had worked together in Korea. Now here we are in our desert camis in Iraq, so go figure. Koreans did a great job. Up on the left is a New Zealand Special Air Service, more like our Army Rangers. I wouldn't quite call them Navy SEALs, but it's a Special Air Service, much like Great Britain. You'll notice that they have a female in the SAS. The SAS were charged with the kind of the high ground in that Bamiyan province. They were great troops. The only person to ever win the New Zealand Victoria Cross, our Medal of Honor, was a New Zealand SAS. Polish in the middle, and on the far right, this is down in Basra, southern Iraq. That's with the Brits. The Brits had the task of rebuilding what was originally the Iraqi Navy. It became the Iraqi Coast Guard for coastal defense purposes. And I'm on one of the small boats with the British commanding officer, just talking about the capabilities of small boats we were delivering to the Iraqi Coast Guard. Upper top left are Jordanian and United Arab Emirates Special Operations Forces. They were, again, engaged in combat, not in big numbers. They wanted to be in the fight, literally. Lower center, more Polish troops. That's, again, down in central Iraq. The Poles had command of multi-division central South Iraq. They were in charge. It was their theater, and they commanded a multinational division of 23 countries. 23 countries under command of the Polish troops. They did a great job, no restrictions on the Poles. A lot of the countries had caveats on restrictions. You can't fight at night, you can't do this, you can't do that. Poles, unlimited warfare. They did whatever. On the right, I'm talking to some El Salvador troops. Again, one of the few Central South American countries. They stayed the long course with us. 6 El Salvadorans were awarded the U.S. military Bronze Star by Secretary Rumsfeld. We've never given personal awards for bravery to foreign troops, but we did in the case of the Salvadorans, who rescued some civilians from the Coalition Provincial Authority governing body. But El Salvadorans, hats off to them as well. Great job.
Okay, this might be a good moment to pause. We have some shiny things to talk about. So, AJ and Bart will do a demonstration of some of the very interesting things that came back, coalition gifts, and other items.
Well, the first thing I'm seeing is a sword. I'm already having a flashback. Naval officers and Navy Chief Petty Officers are authorized to wear swords. It's not a required uniform item. Like many things in our Navy, it goes back to tradition and heritage coming out of the British Navy. So even colonial times, our Navy, the officers carried swords, but they were a little bit longer sabers, not a straight edge like that. The Chief Petty Officers carried more of a cutlass weapon, but we found that the swords became ceremonial only. But the flashback I'm having at that one change of command ceremony where I'm cutting the cake with the knife, you know, again, the sword, the best use. We don't use them very often, so we have to have sword practice, and we have to get out there and do the whole manual of arms with the sword. So I go to the podium for my change of command after practicing with about 4 company commanders, and I'm looking out there, and every one of them, because when you hold the sword, it's going to be, I'll just show you. When you're at attention, that sword comes right up alongside your ear. Every one of those guys, 4 of them, had gigantic Band-Aids on their earlobes. They were trying their best to crack me up. They did a pretty good job. I will say the last time I wore this sword, it was with, I'll say, President Harris, formerly Sergeant First Class Harris. He and I was in that dress white uniform that's on display. He was in his Army blues, and we did a wreath presentation here at Mary Holland Park on July 4th to honor our fallen soldiers, sailors, Marine, airmen. And so that's my personal sword, but again, ceremonial item. But you got to have them. If you don't have one, you borrow one.
This is the beauty of this presentation and having AJ here, I mentioned that he has donated items. So the exhibit, I hope you'll see it today or at least sometime in the future, includes his beautiful dress white uniform, all the beautiful things hanging on it, the accoutrement, and the sword also has been donated. So that will be on display here in perpetuity, as well as the other items. So just want to mention to you to make sure you see the exhibit. There is a dedicated case to AJ's dress uniform and his battle dress uniform and other items.
Yeah.
So we just want to say thank you, AJ, for allowing the county to own these items now.
The cowpack, I guess, this hat is from Kyrgyzstan, and it's a cowpack, and it's made to represent the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, and it's 4 panels, all the same size, white sheep felt, meant to represent the 4 elements: air, water, earth, and fire. And then the stitching all intercedes at some point, and that represents sun and life. These are ceremonial hats, much like the sword, and that was given to me in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, attending a conference with what we all like to call the Stan brothers, and that being Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and of course, Afghanistan. Collectively, we just like to call them the Stan brothers, but that was a gift to me at this Security Cooperation Conference. Every March 5th, the Kyrgyz have a celebration day, a Cowpack Day, where every man is to wear the hat all day long. It's like almost like a July 4th day. It's fireworks and dancing and music. And if you receive one of these hats as a gift from one of the statesmen, it's meant to represent honor and the gratuity and graciousness of the people of Kyrgyzstan. So I picked that up as a gift. Other gifts included this plate from Egypt. We don't really have time to get into immediately following 9/11, but I deployed to Egypt with about 15 coalition countries to practice what we knew would be the inevitable war in Iraq. We were still focused on Afghanistan, but every year, we've been every 2 years doing a exercise in Egypt called Bright Star. It was our way right after 9/11 to get about 23,000 troops into the theater without raising too many questions. We worked primarily with the German, the French, the Italians, Spanish, Kuwaitis, and the host country, Egypt. So the Chief of Staff of the Egyptian Armed Forces presented the general officers participating there with a plate token from Egypt. I was the J5 for that exercise, and I should say, even though while we were deployed to Egypt, we're already working on the campaign plan, and my part in that, in SL, I know you know this, I was working humanitarian side of things, planning the airdrop of what would later turn out to be about 2.5 million daily rations to the Afghan people. We dropped those the same day the air war started, October 7th, and over the next 2 months, we dropped about 2.5 million HDRs, humanitarian daily rations. But that took place while I was in Egypt, actually.
So again, say thank you to AJ and Jan. So many of the gifts that you received from the coalition have been donated to the History Center, and we'll rotate those in and out of the exhibit, so watch for special updates. They're items you don't want to miss. And thank you, Bart. We appreciate your assistance with that. And now, on the humanitarian objectives of the mission, I know it was such an important part of the strategy to improve the betterment of life and stabilize the area. Talk to us about your involvement in humanitarian.
Well, again, under the J5 Directorate at CENTCOM, we had Army Civil Affairs troops assigned to us, and civil affairs, as the name implies, much less about combat, more about building infrastructure, roads, water wells, you name it, including schools. In the first 2 years, Army Civil Affairs Corps had built over 100 schools either built new or rehabbed. I'm in one in Kabul, Afghanistan. The old ruins are kind of off to the right. The new building is there in the center. I'm on the street just talking to students, and then in the middle, I'm actually in a classroom inside the building. You have to remember that Afghanistan was an illiterate country. Nobody went to school. And so when we opened up the schools, you know, it was a major effort to bring education to them. This classroom, I'd say the ages, it's all male, all boys and young men, ages probably 8 to 30. They went to class from 8 to 12, and then they vacated, and then the girls came in. Same thing, probably 8 to 40, because the women had never received education. And that's just, they were still separate classes, male and female. They hadn't gotten to the point of combining classes. But when combat ops actually came to an end fairly quickly in early Afghanistan, it wasn't until the resurgence in about 2008, and that was, of course, long gone. But humanitarian mission was the focal point of everything we did. You cannot believe walking through a country, seeing people with a 5-gallon bucket walking 3 to 5 miles to the closest watering hole to get a bucket of water for the day. Malnutrition, 25% in 2001, over a quarter of all Afghan children died before the age of 5. So medical missions were huge, trying to, you know, get the kids medical care, nourishment. So really the whole coalition focus from 2004 through really 2014 was all about building roads, building schools, building hospitals, getting them electricity. Outside the major cities, you go into the rural areas, there's no power. I mean, when the sun goes down, your light goes out. So all of those things that it takes to build a city, build a country. And of course, the military did not do that alone. We were in partner with the U.S. Agency for International Development, a big, huge partner of ours, the United Nations, but anything you can think of what it takes to run a city, multiply that by running a country, and that's what we were trying to do, was provide humanitarian assistance by the billions of dollars.
So here we are, I'm going to put you on the spot. August 2021, we departed the area.
Yep.
And the war ended. And so what are your impressions at this point? Where do we go from here?
Okay, non-attribution. My personal thoughts, obviously. I won't even go into the evacuation. I mean, that's the military plans, NEOs, non-combatant evacuation operations all the time. We're good at it. We weren't good at it, in my opinion. We were not good at it in Afghanistan. We left people hanging, and we left the coalition hanging because they didn't know we were going to get out as fast as we can. They had their own diplomats and aid workers. They're trying to get airplanes in, get their people out. That's neither here nor there. Really, Meredith, to answer the question, I mean, it's hard to construct a positive scenario. You can look with hope that the future government, the future Taliban 2.0, will be a little bit less restrictive, less apocalyptic, if you will, than what existed in 2001, but I doubt it. One thing for certain, the progress we made with women and young girls and education and having a life, that'll go away. You know, they're going to go back to, I'm sure, the way it was. The big question is, what now do the central characters on this ancient stage do? That being China, Pakistan, and Iran, and their relationship with the Taliban and vice versa. But I think we're setting ourselves up for another commemorative 9/11 event. It may be years down the road. The one thing we learned from the Taliban is, one of their favorite sayings is, Americans have the watches, but we have all the time. And for us in Afghanistan, time ran out. We did not pursue what my boss, General Abizadeh, termed the long war. We didn't want to stick it out. And so, you know, all I can really say is that the services of the U.S. and coalition forces and their sacrifice, landing on the line, risking all, bought us 2 decades of terror-free activities at home. But there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And if we do this again, we need to learn how to fight and think like an insurgent. Insurgencies are not armies against armies. It is a long, long process. And there's lots of lessons learned that I could share, but we don't have the time. So Meredith, I want to thank you for creating this exhibit, you and Jamie and Bart and the staff here. Commissioner Lindsay, thanks for your and your fellow commissioners' support. The History Center is a jewel in Polk County. It is a jewel that I know cities across the state are envy of. And I thank you, Meredith, for even having an interest in these things.
Well, and we want to thank you, and don't be nervous because AJ has agreed to stay with us throughout the day. So you all can ask questions and spend time with him throughout the day. And again, I want everybody to appreciate the value of this relationship and the fact that the History Center has become the recipient and become the repository for these amazing items, and to be able to curate the story of someone who's so important to our community. Even though you're moving away, we're not going to let you go. We're going to keep your memories.
There you go. Bartow will always be home, like I said.
So AJ will be with us for a while. The next phase of our presentation, we have created, Jamie has created, there's a PowerPoint in the exhibit that we want to make sure you see that is more about the story, and it includes a memorial, a commemorative piece about those people who lost their lives from Polk County. So if you would just endorse, I don't want anybody to move, leave the room, answer calls. This is a very solemn moment, so she's going to share a piece of that exhibit with you now.
Yep, so for this part of the exhibit, we interspliced some PowerPoint slides that AJ had provided to us for programs that they would present to the general public. What is CENTCOM? What are they doing? What is the area of responsibility? And then from there, I hopped on the Armed Forces Network. My veterans are probably familiar with AFN, and started scrolling some of their video footage that had been produced in theaters. So the video in the gallery runs about 30 minutes. This is 3 minutes and 52 seconds of that, and includes, again, as Murtis mentioned, a commemoration to the 7 individuals from Polk County who were, you know, when they enlisted or registered in Polk County, passed away. So.
This is not, however, just America's fight. And what is at stake is not just America's freedom. This is the world's fight. This is civilization's fight. This is the fight of all who believe in progress and pluralism, tolerance and freedom. We ask every nation to join us. We will ask and we will need the help of police forces, intelligence service, and banking systems around the world. The United States is grateful that many nations and many international organizations have already responded with sympathy and with support. Nations from Latin America to Asia to Africa to Europe to the Islamic world. Perhaps the NATO Charter reflects best the attitude of the world. An attack on one is an attack on all.
Marines from Patrol Base Boldak are heading outside the wire, but on this day, they're not searching for insurgents or improvised explosive devices. They're participating in Operation Nightingale.
So we call this Battle for the People.
It's still important to focus on the insurgency, but showing compassion to the community the insurgency is trying to influence can pay dividends.
In our mind, as a company, we're trying to focus on the people just as much as we do on the enemy. But I think if you can strike a balance between the people and the enemies as far as your efforts, I think you'll see immeasurable success. And thankfully, that's what we've seen here. We've seen this AO come a long way since we've been here because we've really focused on the people. You know, we get to see a lot of smiles every time we do this. That makes us feel good about what we're doing.
For every beginning, there's an end. The Korean Provincial Reconstruction Team held its end-of-mission ceremony on Bagram Airfield. The Korean PRT has spent the past 4 years helping the provincial government and the people of Parwan with its reconstruction efforts. During the ceremony, the Korean PRT presented a video highlighting its contributions and many successes. Successes that included training in medicine, agricultural development, and computer technology for the people of Parwan.
They've been providing a lot of education to the local nationals, as well as vocational training, medical support to the local nationals.
Because of the efforts of the PRT, the Parwan province has become one of the most dynamic and prominent areas in Afghanistan.
You know, a lot of people are saying how much of a hero I am and stuff like that, and I've never been one for fanfare or anything like that, and you know, everyone over there gave something, you know, but there's some people over there who gave everything, and those are the heroes, you know. And, every day you wake up, just think about the price of freedom.